I'm a Yankee. No, not that kind of Yankee. I come from the north. Recently, I took a trip down south. When I arrived, I saw my friend doing something strange to a pie. I asked, "What is that?" "Tomato pie," he said. "Tomato pie?" "Apple pie, of course." "Tomato sauce?" "Why not?" But one bite and I quickly learned that this cheesy, juicy, flaky treat is a hidden gem. You can definitely go store-bought for the pie crust, but I'm going homemade. Found a great recipe attached below. Super easy, and I was really happy with the way that it came out. So starting with a bowl, we'll get our flour in there, and then we will throw our salt, and we'll give that a mix with our finger. This is a butter substitute, but I used the exact same amount, diced it, and chill it, and it worked perfectly for me. It was obviously a lot less calories, but if you want to go with the real thing, no worries. The substitute just needed a little bit more flour, but other than that, I was super happy. You want to give this a mix until you have these kind of little pieces of dough. It's not going to be cohesive yet until we add our liquids. We'll get our egg and our cold water into the bowl, then give this a quick mix. Mix it around for a while until you get a dough ball. It should be super soft, but it shouldn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes to mix this into a nice soft dough ball. We will then get it out to our work surface, and this is enough for a top and a bottom for a 9-inch pie pan. So I'm going to cut this in half into 2 even pieces. Doesn't really matter what shape you put them in, but wrap them very tightly in plastic. And you want to let these sit for at least 4 hours or overnight. These are going to be super soft. They're really squishable and squeezy. I just can't stop squeezing them for a second. All right, that's enough. Let's put them in the fridge, and then after at least 4 hours or overnight, we'll get this unwrapped, and it's still super soft, and this is ready to go. Again, I think because I used the butter substitute, it was a little bit softer than we want, so I just put a liberal amount of flour onto my work surface and just kind of put a little bit more onto the dough, and it soaked it up very nicely, and then it was perfect. I just kind of spread it out with my fingers first to get it to this shape, and then we will bring in the big guns with our rolling pin, and it really doesn't take much. Again, it's really soft. It's almost like Play-Doh, so it's very easy to roll out, especially with a rolling pin. We'll go one way on one side and then circle it around and go on the other side, and now we have a smooth top or bottom. And here is my 9-inch pie pan. I'm going to grease it with a little bit of our butter substitute. Really doesn't take that much, just enough to make sure that the crust will not stick to it. And then we will take our crust and lay it over. This is really easy, really fun. I mean, you can see there's tons here. This is half of the crust. You just want to kind of fold it over and then push it in until you get the air bubbles out, and then all that excess crust we will cut off. But I am actually going to use that, so just put it to the side for the moment, and then crimp your edges here. Again, however you shape or whatever kind of crimping you want. I'm just going with a simple rollover so we get that nice buttery crust on the edge, and there you go. There is our bottom, but what are we going to put in this pie? Well, tomatoes, of course. These are some nice juicy ones. I actually got them from my brother from another mother. If you don't have one of those, you could substitute your sister from another mista. That should work just as well. But now that we have our tomatoes here, let's cut out the stem. I find it easiest to work with a serrated knife when cutting tomatoes, and we're going to cut these about 1 inch or 2, not too thin, not too thick. And now you can see these are some nice juicy tomatoes, and they are extra juicy. Thank you, Jack Black. And we don't want all that juice in our tomato pie because it's going to make it soggy, and we're not doing like a blind bake or anything, so I'm just going to put these on a rack, and then I'm going to cover them with some paper towels to get the excess moisture, because if we tried to cook them as is like this, they would make a really soggy tomato pie. So again, we're going to put it on a rack. If you don't have a rack, I mean, that helps the moisture escape, but you can just use a pan with a lot of paper towels, and you can see it really soaks it up right away. I'm going with 2 layers. You want to let that sit for at least a couple hours at room temperature. I actually let it sit longer in the fridge, and they really it works really well. The paper towel just kind of sticks there. That's no problem. Just peel it off. And now maybe you can see the difference, maybe you can't, but you can definitely feel the difference. There's a lot less juice, but the flavor is just a little bit more concentrated. So there are our tomatoes. Now the only other thing for our simple tomato pie is an onion. I'm going with a white onion. I'm going to take half of it, and I'm just going to cut it nice and thin. Again, not super thin, but not super thick. You want it to be able to cook in our tomato pie, so that's what I'm going with. And now the cheese. You could do anything you want. I have a cheddar and a pepper jack, and I'm going to cut these in thirds, and there you have it. I just cut the cheese. Oh boy, it's going to be one of those videos, huh? All right, well, we'll take our thirds here, and then we're going to grate them down, grate them nice and finely. The more grated they are, the better they're going to melt, because we're going to use these to make a cheese sauce, and I also want to get some herbs in there. We have thyme on the left, basil on the right. Pick your leaves off and give them a nice chop. Just adds a really nice freshness and herbiness to a very rich cheese sauce. So we're going to get a pot, throw a little bit of oil in there, and I like a lot of garlic for this to complement our tomatoes, so I'll throw in a couple of tablespoons of garlic. Let that simmer over low heat, and then once it is cooked down, we're actually going to make a roux. So I'm going to grab a tablespoon of flour to match my tablespoon of oil that is already in the pan. Turn the heat down and cook that on low, and that is going to help us thicken our sauce. So once it looks like that, just a little bit cooked down so the flour is cooked out, we're going to throw in some milk. You can use any kind of milk you want. This is 1% milk. I do find the more fat, the easier it is to make this cheese sauce, but just cook it on super, super low. Keep mixing it, and that roux is what's going to help kind of make it look almost like a gravy. It's really a bechamel sauce. It's going to thicken up, and then we're going to add in our cheese slowly, a little bit at a time. Again, keep this on super low heat, and it will just kind of almost melt on its own, but you want to keep moving and keep mixing. Just keep throwing in your cheese slowly in small batches until it starts to melt and you have a nice, smooth cheese sauce. Depending on what kind of cheese you're using, you will definitely see the color change, and the cheese along with the roux will really help thicken this up until you have a nice, creamy, cheesy cheese sauce. I'm throwing in a couple tablespoons of Parmesan cheese too here at the end, just to give it a nice salty bite there. So those are my three cheeses, the Parmesan, the pepper jack, and the cheddar. Now we'll go with our chopped herbs, and again, you can use whatever kind of herbs that you want. I just like thyme and basil for this because it gives it a nice savory feel to it, and also a nice freshness to a very rich cheese sauce. And there you go, there's our cheese sauce. As it cools, it will definitely thicken even more. You can see it's nice and thick here. I'm going to give it a taste, and it's very, very nice. I'm going to hit it with a little bit more salt and pepper, and it is good to go. And we definitely don't want to pour this hot cheese sauce over our cold tomatoes and cold crust, so we will let it cool down, and it will thicken as it cools. So back to our pie crust. Of course, we're going to start layering here that we actually have something to put inside of it. So I'm going to start with our tomatoes, and there's no real rhyme or reason to this. You can do it however you want. I like to just let them overlap just ever so slightly, and that is a nice layer of our tomatoes. And then we will throw a layer of our onions over that. Here's our cheese sauce. You can see it definitely thickened up as it cooled down. I mean, you can do the cheese any way you want. I know my friend actually just mixes it with mayo, and it comes out like a really cheesy, sweet kind of way. This is a little bit more savory, but both great options. You can do it however you want. Another layer of our tomatoes and our onions, a little bit more cheese sauce on top. You can definitely see there's a little bit less cheese here, and that is intentional because I use more cheese sauce under there, a little bit more here, and then I'm going to just go with a nice finely grating of a little bit more pepper jack cheese. This is going to get nice and bubbly and kind of give a golden look right under the crust. And speaking of the crust, that excess dough that I had cut around our bottom crust, I'm going to use that to create the lattice effect with our dough here. This is only one of the doughs. I actually saved the other dough and put it in the freezer for some other time, so I had plenty of leftover dough from just the edges that I cut off, and I use that to just do the lattice effect. You can cover it, you can leave it open, whatever you want. I just think it's such a cool look with the lattice effect. And after 45 minutes to an hour in a 350-degree oven, you will have something like this. You'll see the crust start to brown, the cheese start to bubble a little bit. It'll get that nice golden crispy crust to our tomatoes and everything else inside there. You can see this is super rustic. This is exactly what I was going for. It smells absolutely amazing. It looks really good. We're gonna cut ourselves a slice here. Now you can see, I mean, all the layers of flavor in here, that rich creamy cheese sauce. The tomatoes are sweet. It's just got this sweet savory element inside there. It just looks like the perfect pie. Whether you say tomato, or tomato, these ingredients almost blend together like a pizza pie within a pie, which is kind of a mind-blowing concept, but super easy to do, super homemade, super rustic. It'll just make you feel good inside. So grab your big juicy tomatoes and stuff them in your pie.